Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Hey, today is our 13th show. This is going to be Lucky 13. And this is Fahrusha and...
Hi, Kate Valentine here.
We have an incredible guest today. John B. Alexander, Ph.D. is our guest today, and he is an amazing guy. The simplest way to express this is to say that it seems to me that he has packed 5 lifetimes of activities and accomplishments into one, and he's not done yet. If I were to list all of his awards and his accomplishments, it would take half the show. So succinctly, here it goes, and he can certainly correct me if I misstate something. He was born in New York and entered the Army in 1956. He commanded a Special Forces A-team in Vietnam and in Thailand. He headed the Weird Desk at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he started the Advanced Theoretical Physics Project Group while he was still enlisted. It was a cover to meet with others in government to discuss what they knew about UFOs. He's written several books, including UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities, and has been written about in the John Ronson book, The Men Who Stare at Goats. He knows all about remote viewing, has spent time at the Sherman, Skinwalker, Bigelow Ranch. He has traveled around the world investigating shamanism. He knows just about everybody in the paranormal world and in the intelligence field, and took his Ph.D. under Kubler-Ross in thanatology, or the study of the death and near-death experience. He is an expert in non-lethal weaponry, and after he left the military with the rank of Colonel of Infantry, he worked in the field of non-lethal weaponry at the Los Alamos National Labs. Recently, he gave a paper about interspecies communications in Washington at the Society for Scientific Exploration, which he helped to found. Welcome, Dr. Alexander.
Well, thank you. One correction is I was never with DIA, so...
Oh, okay.
Not
all right.
sure where that came from.
I guess it was at your time at the Pentagon, so I misstated that, and thank you for setting it straight.
I was an inspector general.
Okay. You didn't sit at the desk where all the strange reports came in?
There is no such desk. But
okay.
I'm sure that's part of what we can discuss.
Okay.
But Dr. Alexander, let me also give my thanks for you taking this time to be with us. You certainly have had a fascinating life's journey, and thank you for for deigning to talk to us today. If I could just quote, just to start, since my area is sort of UFOs, that's what I like. You state in your book, UFOs are real. With no prevarication or qualification of terms, there are physical objects of unknown origin that do transit our universe. And I thank you for saying that, because that's really...
First paragraph, obviously.
Yeah, it will. Your book, usually I'll blaze through a book, 2 hours maybe. I still haven't quite finished it, I'll be honest about it. I've been reading for hours.
Well, maybe I should tell you the last paragraph, jumping to the end, because I think that's equally important.
I've got it right here, and yes, please do.
Go ahead.
Please do.
Well, synthesized, it says, whatever we're dealing with, it is more complex than we ever imagined, or maybe than we could imagine.
Yeah.
And I think rather than getting simple answers, we're not at the point of even asking the right questions yet.
Unfortunately, I have to agree with you.
I would agree as well.
But, it occurred to me, because I'm reading your book, I'm sitting in the backyard, and we are on a flight path from Newark Airport, and I'm watching these planes go overhead, and I'm thinking if I had been a Native American in the same location and saw, a 767, whatever the commercial planes are, go overhead, I would think, whoa. And I couldn't begin to understand what it was. I mean, I know it was up there, it was flying, and it was unexplainable, but Even if someone had landed and said, well, this is what it is, it's jet propulsion and special metals and we have to take off and land and blah, 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 whatever, it would have been as if they had spoken Greek. And I have a feeling you're correct. That's probably what, if the UFO occupants, if there are such, would come down and speak to us, that's probably wouldn't really help us much.
That's the problem. And you say UFO occupants. I'll start with simple things like, what's a UFO? And the reason I say that is we have stories of little balls of light that are floating around, and then we've got these hard craft, probably more than a mile across, seen by lots of witnesses, and everything in between, thousands of perturbations. So, to begin with, I'm not even sure what we mean when we say I've seen a UFO, other than it's something that's, flying about that we can't identify. So, the other piece that I think is equally important, if we're going to talk about, alien encounters and things like that, is that there have been reports of interactions between humans and sentient non-humans throughout, recorded history. And the UFO piece of that is really kind of new.
Basically, since the end of the Second World War, though there were things going on back to the 1880s or 1890s with the airships.
You're talking millennia.
No, I'm saying that the modern perturbations of that would have started mostly post-World War II with a little bit of a nod to ghost rockets and so forth. But millennia people, Ezekiel's wheel and such, and throughout history there have been sightings of things, unexplainable things in the sky, absolutely. And it really may not be all the same thing. I'm guessing it may, it could be some are from space, some are from a different dimension, some are from the future. Some of them are, some of the vehicles, so-called vehicles, may be living beings. For all we know, there's certain things that would lead us to believe that sometimes that might be the case.
Well, there are certainly no simple solutions. I don't think we're going to have an answer where one size fits all by any stretch of the imagination. And, frankly, I'll get my mantra in here because people say, why are you doing this? And what I think needs to happen is to get serious scientists involved in the study and make it permissible for them to do so without risking their livelihood or reputation. And the problem for many people, and there are serious scientists who are interested, but they'll also tell you, hey, don't put my name out there because they will be attacked.
Dr. Alexander, isn't this really, though, part of a larger problem that we have with science? Since even since it's been over 100 years since quantum physics was born, many people actually day to day in science are still living in the 19th century materialistic concept, and they're not open to other explanations. They're not open to, shall we say, consciousness as a big part of this enigma?
Well, that's the fundamental problem. And, we've now politicized science to a high degree. You see all the arguments going on, from healthcare to global climate change and a whole host of areas. And the issues, quite frankly, are politically and economically driven as opposed to being driven by the facts. Dean Radin likes to say, if psi were a crime, it would be, convicted easily, meaning the evidence is beyond all reasonable doubt.
Yes. So you have explained in your book, but perhaps you would like to talk to our listeners a little bit about how you decided to first get into this, because as I understand it, you have not had a lot of UFO encounters yourself.
No, my one experience was really pretty mundane. Having said that, other members of my family have been had experiences that are much more germane than mine. But as I say in the book, my interest goes back to 1947 when they first started making news, and I was a student in grade school at that time, and for whatever reason, this various kinds of phenomena just have always struck me as extremely interesting.
I think, that's true of many people in the field, but if I may again quote from you, and I thought it was brilliant that you set up Advanced Theoretical Physics Project as opposed to UFO research. I mean, you just skirted right around the issue. That was genius.
Well, what we were trying to do there, I'll be quite frank.
Sure, that was genius.
That's when the Freedom of Information Act had just come out.
Uh-huh.
And I knew that if anybody, under the Act, if anybody asked about UFO data, we would have to support it. And I didn't think people would come up with, let's ask about advanced theoretical physics.
No.
So it was a way to
Brilliant.
kind of hide what we were doing. And in fact, as I mentioned in the book, after I had started the group and whatnot, I kind of went to my bosses at the 3- and 4-star level and said, hey, boss, I don't want you to hear about this first from the Washington Post. Interestingly, they were quite supportive.
Well, I think everyone senses that there's something out there, and it's probably not at the top of everybody's priority list, but it certainly is something to look into. But you stated something I found very interesting. When I resisted various movements and failed to get my way, it was only later that the necessity for certain events to have occurred became apparent. Maybe it was synchronicity, but the eventual functions and outcomes that led to the observations in this book were far too complex to have been planned or orchestrated by me. While the emphasis here is on UFO studies, there were interactions in many other realms of phenomena that remain totally intertwined with destiny. I mean, that's far from what I would have thought a military approach to the problem was. You really are very interesting.
Well, I think many people vastly underestimate the military per se.
Mm-hmm.
Many of you may know my good friend Jim Channon.
Yes, indeed.
Goat, and his creation of the 1st Earth Battalion and the things we did around that. There were a lot of very bright, innovative people. When it gets to UFOs, remember, the government is not monolithic, nor is the military. And we know that 7 to 10% of the adult population have actually seen a UFO. So that number translates into the military as well. So you've got many people who've had personal experience that they're not willing to set aside. But there is a difference between individual interest and institutional interest or responsibility.
Right. Well, I have noticed, Dr. Alexander, in my time being involved with the UFO groups that, occasionally go to a meeting or some kind of a seminar or whatever, MUFON, and I am amazed by the number of former military people that populate the interest groups. So
yeah, they are, and you got guys like George Filer who puts out Filer Files.
Right, good friend of ours. Yeah.
Right. So no, there's, as I said, military's big institution. You amortize this over. Some of us have been around over half a century, and so that's a whole lot of people, and you get probably in the millions military people who have actually seen UFOs.
Well, that is true. My point only being that it seemed like in the groups that I've gone to, including MUFON, the military seems more represented than you would have in a general population. So, like every third guy that's in the room is former military.
I have never experienced that with MUFON. And I think there's two problems that we're going to get to here. One are the skeptics and debunkers who just will not accept anything, even interestingly sometimes when they've had experience. But on the other side, you have the true believers who just believe anything.
Yes.
Even when demonstrably false.
Yes. It is a fine line to walk there between the two. And I do think that some of the skeptics, it's my contention, that some of the skeptics are afraid of the possibility, because if they concede to such a thing being true, then they have to concede to the idea of something being smarter than they are. Because
I don't think it's so much smarter than they are, but I think you're absolutely right. The issue, in my view, there is that if they accept these things, and we could look at a variety of phenomena, but if that's true, then the whole materialistic paradigm collapses. So
right.
Their whole worldview is at stake, and that's pretty scary.
Yes, loss of control. In either case, whether there's somebody out there smarter than them or that their whole paradigm collapses, the end result is the same. The end result is loss of control.
Just like in the Old West, where there's always a faster gun, there's always a smarter gal or guy out there.
Right.
A lot of bright people in the world. Unfortunately, and there's a word that I've actually got published, called cerebral centrism, which is sort of an American disease where we think we're the only smart people in the world, even though we're only 4% of the population of the entire planet.
Yeah, well, they should just go to some of the engineering schools and see that there are a lot of people who aren't Americans taking the honors at the engineering schools in America, and then they can change their mind.
That IIT, or India Institute of Technology, is probably the best in the world now. I mean, they're in Delhi, India, just doing phenomenal.
Do you think their space program is going to go anywhere?
Well, China, we've ceded space to China. I mean, that's where it's going. They use Russia kind of as a research laboratory to add, but India's going to catch up. I think it's a matter of resource, but China's committed the resources to space.
That's a shame. I think you're probably right, but it doesn't really. Where does that leave this country?
Behind?
In a word, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Actually, the direction we're going, to a large degree, although there are government contracts, but you're seeing, the private space industry catch up. Yeah. You had Burt Rutan. I was frankly honored to be at the Ground Zero when he put Mike Melville into space for the first time.
Wow.
It was a totally civilian enterprise. The guy that I watch here, you mentioned the ranch,
yes.
Bigelow, and Bigelow Aerospace is moving at warp speed. Elon Musk and SpaceX are just doing tremendous things. So we're expecting, and eventually I think the civilian industry must take over. Now, where they're really going out front, and I don't know if China's going to be able to catch up, but what Bert had done is basically attacking the business model. When he put Mike up, I was also there when he rolled out Spaceship One initially, but he put that up. He developed the White Knight to launch it, all the support mechanisms, and did the whole thing for, we estimate, less than $25 million. And as I argue, NASA couldn't have done the paperwork for $25 million.
Yes, a lot of red tape in dealing with the government.
So you think that private enterprise would possibly outpace any sort of a national program then? I agree with you. I think it would too, because people like to work for themselves, sort of, and push a little bit harder.
I'm sorry. Are you on a speakerphone?
Oh no.
We've got.
Because you were tailing off there a bit.
Oh, okay. I was just basically. I think that people like Elon Musk and so on will have a better chance of really making the major breakthroughs, as opposed to, I think the national attempts are certainly much better funded, but I think they're also more carefully regulated and less open to innovation. And I may be perfectly wrong in that. I don't know. It just that's just sort of my impression.
Yeah, I think they're going to do whatever it takes, and you're going to see big advances. One of the problems with regulations here in the U.S. as well as internationally is nobody's really thought this stuff through. So every time we get to the next advance, they've got to say, what the hell are we going to do with this? I know that there's something called ITARs, which has to do with exportation of various technology, and it is just a nightmare to get through. You know, most of the launches are not taking place from the U.S., so if you ship something out, the rockets are, under international or the U.S. export laws, which are absolutely draconian.
Well, to change gears just a little bit, it's been about 40 years since we've been on the moon. And not myself, obviously, except in my remote viewing. But it's been a long time since we've been on the moon, and China sent up the little Jade Rabbit, and it broke down. So, in some sense, we haven't really pushed further than we had gone.
But you get back to the economics of that. At the time that Apollo program was running, NASA had 4% of the national budget. Right now, they're at about 0.4%.
Yeah.
So we're talking literally, an order of magnitude more money, and we're just not prepared at this time, I don't think, to win it. When we talk about going to Mars and potentially beyond, and we do send craft out periodically, but basically we seeded heavy lift. We're coming back in that area, but let the former Soviet Union, the Russians, take over that field. We've had people going up to the ISS, and individuals who can afford millions to do it. But the Russians basically quadrupled the price of what they were going to charge people to do various things. So that became a club for only the ultra-wealthy.
Some people argue that the International Space Station isn't literally outer space. I know it is space, but it's like within a certain. Is it within the Van Allen belt?
It's in geosynchronous orbit, or it is orbiting the U.S. Or the world. It's high up there now. There's huge controversy on the effects of radiation on people, and we're learning a lot. And there are huge questions about doing deep space explorations with humans as to whether or not we can physically withstand it. And particularly radiation, as well as, bone and muscle deterioration and a whole host of physical issues. I have a friend who's one of NASA's chief scientists who just says we shouldn't go out there. We, will not be able to live in that environment.
Which brings me to the question, which is really theoretical also, are the so-called grays actually robotic self-replicating characters from some other galaxy or some other solar system? There's been talk that...
I hear the stories. I have no idea. I get back there to say we're not asking the right questions, and are we even ready to?
Probably not.
That there's a host of anecdotal discussions, and the internet is obviously rife with them. as to who and what they are and various types. You know, therein is another question that I've raised at these UFO conferences. If you're going to talk about abductions, and I'm sure that some sorts of interactions take place, but then you start looking at the variety of alien interactions alone, and you go, what are we on, the cosmic bucket list of places to visit or something?
Well, if these beings are even from space, or if they're on a parallel dimensional plane, for lack of a better word, you decided at some point, not so long ago, certainly not in your 20s, you decided to get a Ph.D. in death studies and near-death studies with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Am I not correct?
Yeah, well, I was working, obviously had my master's in education and was working, and I was very fortunate. That was a serendipitous event that Elizabeth became the head of my committee, but it did cause kind of an abrupt shift in direction, particularly for my dissertation.
So what drew you to that? Because that sounds like, I don't think it's a complete change of direction, because, I'm a person who never feels alone in a room, even if I'm the only human in it. So I kind of get people's interest in consciousness studies, but it does seem probably to a lot of people like a big change in direction for you. So what brought you to that?
Well, part of this is just the academic process, the things you have to do to get a doctorate, including a lot of studies in various areas. There was nothing in that specific field. I was working in behavioral science. I had assignments in behavioral science positions before. We had something called organizational effectiveness. We had a lot of behavioral science there. And also been to various, psychological courses, human relations courses, et cetera, et cetera. So I was putting the package together. And then I was always interested in near-death experiences, even before the term was coined. And then I attended a workshop with Elizabeth called Life, Death, and Transition. And that was pretty profound, particularly with the kinds of people who were there, including maybe a quarter of the people attending were actually dying.
Oh.
And you really, this got a very intense focus, of course. And you started hearing more and more of these stories. And then she and Raymond Moody, came out. Raymond, of course, wrote the book Life After Life, which sort of introduced the world to it, and it has expanded. You didn't mention after I got my doctorate, I did end up eventually as the president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies.
IANS, yes.
Yeah. And obviously there you end up, that was the primary focus of that organization.
And you yourself have never had a near-death experience, I'm taking it.
No, I have not. I like to say that I sort of seem to be a catalyst. Strange things happen around me as opposed to me. As my brothers say, that I study the things that happen to them, because I've got a brother who has had a couple of NDEs. So
that sounds a lot like, I think, your friend and mine, Russell Targ. He seems to also be that sort of a catalyst.
Right. Yep.
Well, and also you keep coming back to synchronicity and how some force that you call destiny seems to push you into these things. You seem to be almost a person who is capable of following the path, and so the path was cleared for you. I mean, you have had just an incredible life with...
well, sometimes what you have to do is just surrender and go with it.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things I pointed out in the book, that, if you're pushing really hard and not getting results, probably there's something else in the offing that comes along.
Yeah, it seems that way in life. It does.
It does. I always believe in making an intention and then letting the intention go.
Right. Well, the letting go part really is quite important, and a lot of folks don't realize that. It's just, if it doesn't work, we'll just keep trying harder. So, well, not all of us.
Yeah, I have to let it happen for you with the intention. I do creative visualization with some of my clients, and that is something that you really have to talk to people about, letting go of their, not giving up on their dream, but letting it go, just letting the forces that you put in motion with the creative visualization, let them do their job. Just let it fly, let it go up to the sky,
Cute anecdote. I don't know if you remember Cleve Baxter.
Yes.
In primary perception, he's the one who was talking to plants and
yes.
All of that. And I had worked with Cleve, and National Academy of Sciences was doing a study on weirdness, and I was involved. And long story short, we were looking at white cells, and they were at the laboratory in San Diego, and we had asked a couple of them to donate cells, and the scientist is looking at it. We're in the conference, and he goes, and all of a sudden you see this big spike occur, and he goes, "See, it doesn't work." As soon as I stopped, yeah, we could have predicted that.
That's good.
Kind of hard to explain to them.
That's pretty funny. That's good. And the other thing that you seem to have gotten interested in recently was interspecies communication.
And we're all animal lovers here, so do tell.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly talk to my dog. He doesn't answer a lot.
And my cats talk to me.
Not verbally, but I do get.
Well, this is much bigger animals. And this talk was given to the Society for Scientific Exploration,
right?
That I'm a member of for about 3 decades, and probably the top scientific organization looking at phenomena, head and shoulders above most of the ones that are out there. But I was looking at some work we had done with dolphins, both in captivity and, more importantly, in the wild. And then last year, we were in Tonga, which is in the South Pacific, a little tiny dot out there, but it's one of 2 places in the world that you can actually get in the water with humpback whales.
Wow.
And it got up close and very personal. We're talking ranges of inches at times, and they seemed to know exactly where we were, and the interactions were just absolutely amazing.
That must have been an incredible experience. I had swum with the dolphins in the Caribbean and with wild dolphins when it was legal, and it was really an experience to be vibed by them. They use their sonar, I guess, on you, and it's like a feeling that's not describable in English words by me. Let's put it that way. But
we had them come in. Again, there are ranges where they would understand. And a lot of people don't realize how big dolphins are, but many of them are 800 to 1,000 pounds, 9, 10 feet, 11 feet long,
yes.
And they would come in they would come right by you within, sometimes within an inch or 2.
Yes. And
again, knew exactly where you were. And we had certain protocols in place so you didn't touch them because they are susceptible to human diseases and things. But, certainly quite an experience.
And you know of the Dolphin Energy Group at the Monroe Institute, I'm taking it.
I didn't know that Monroe was doing that. I was down to see Joe McMoneagle in January and stopped by Scooter. His wife is now running the...
Yes, I'm a member, so, yeah. Place. But know that for years they've had, and it's not directly involved with dolphins in the sense that they don't swim with the dolphins, nor do they, touch them in any way. But they have a sort of mental communication for healing humans with dolphins that goes on in the lab there. And I guess Shirley Bliley over there had started it when Robert Monroe's wife got sick. And it's been going ever since with healing. You know, you can request a healing, and the group, the Dolphin Energy Group, will attempt to contact their dolphins psychically, or you would say telepathically, and ask for healing on whatever is wrong with the person in question. I just throw that out there. So,
well, there are a host of various alternative medical techniques. I knew Nancy, and of course Bob was a good friend of mine. Yeah, he did some pretty remarkable stuff that the public is not generally aware of as well. By the way, I might transition this a bit, but I think directly related. You had mentioned the work with Sherman. One of the things I point out is that, and you had talked about the issue of consciousness and, you know, being basically spiritual beings with a human existence as opposed to, you know, the materialistic world.
right.
And the point is, this is really a Western view of the world. There are other cultures in the world. I do a lot of work in Brazil. You may know John of God, for instance.
Yes.
But I have many friends down there. And the point is, these sorts of spiritual interventions are totally accepted, even with the well-educated intelligentsia, whereas here we treat these phenomena as if they're weird and, you know,
Because
different, can't explain it.
we're all considered meat puppets with a chemical consciousness. It's just a chemical problem in the brain, that it's an accidental chemical consciousness, rather than the brain being a sort of transceiver for consciousness while we're a greater being.
Okay.
I don't know. You have to forgive me.
We do not disagree.
Okay, good.
Okay. The other thing, too, is when you talk about interspecies communication, what is your view of, is there, I mean, myself, I can't believe that there were not other sentient beings somewhere in the universe, and that eventually, given certainly enough time, we could figure out to come in contact with them. Certainly that type of communication would be quite difficult, I think.
Well, I'm not sure if it would be difficult or not. You know, one approach to this is that obviously there must be sentient life somewhere in the universe at this time. And that's just based on pure numbers, you know, the number of planets that we're finding out there and allowing for evolution. So from a straight materialistic view, you can suggest that. We mentioned earlier about the interactions between humans and sentient non-humans. But, you know, there's another aspect to this, and that is if you consider white mice or ants or, you know, a host of things that we experiment on scientifically, and there's absolutely no attempt whatsoever to interact, you know, with them or, you know, ask them about what's going on or what they think about the experiment. You know, some hypothesize that if you have sentient consciousness that's sufficiently evolved, we may be the white mice.
True.
Well, that's true. That's a little scary, but probably true. You know, going back to a couple of things, I'm going to throw like slightly a little more hardball here. You, in your book, you ascertained that it didn't seem as though people in the upper echelons of the military really knew the answers about UFOs, and they weren't holding things back, and that basically, and I agree with you that that there has already been disclosure on some level. But I point to the things that go on at JPL in terms of some of the photographs of Mars, where there are people who I think quite accurately looked at some of the photographs and saw some what looked a great deal like fossils in on the Earth, and then they were promptly ground up. It's sort of like, I want to see what that tree is about, and so I'll cut down the tree and kill it, kind of thing.
Wait, let's wait, because this is something I think I know about.
Okay, go for it.
The guy you probably want to talk to is Richard Hoover. Hoover is a guy who spent, an entire career at NASA, and actually says that, hey, we do have evidence of alien life. He was involved with picking up meteorites in Antarctica, and they like that area because it's relatively pristine, and will argue that we have, in fact, found life. But he takes them to task for exactly that reason. Said they were doing with the rover experiments, cutting up rocks there, and he said he saw evidence again, but we're talking, understand, unicellular life, but fossils that can be seen, and they did in fact grind them up.
Yes.
Now, in my view, NASA is just scared to death of these topics. I mean, they are overtly hostile to UFOs, kind of in general. You do find mavericks, guys like Story Musgrave, who says, hey, we will, certainly open to the topic. He speaks at UFO conferences.
Yes.
But says he never saw anything about that. It's also interesting, Ed Mitchell is a friend of mine.
Yes, great guy.
Served, he was Apollo 14, who firmly believes that we've been contacted and these interactions go on, but equally says, and absolutely nothing that of his beliefs on this comes from NASA. Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult when you have an organization that you would think ought to be interested, and there are individuals certainly again who are interested, but institutionally just overtly hostile to the topic.
Isn't there also a kind of like a competition between NASA and JPL in the sense of the manned space flight from NASA versus the robotic space flight from JPL? No,
JPL is a contractor.
Okay. Because I've heard that the JPL doesn't want to hear anything about man in space. They want to send their stuff into space.
There are, for some, as I mentioned earlier, for some pretty good reasons to ask about whether or not man can survive in space, and these are real, very real concerns. And also, it's kind of like the whole drone issue that you have now. I mentioned I had given a talk down at Air University, Maxwell Air Force Base, and got booed when I was telling them we need to get pilots out of planes because you pay a horrendous price.
Yes.
For all of the life support systems that go along with that, as well as redundancy and whatnot. Whereas with robotics, there's a lot you can do at a much more cost-effective manner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But don't you feel that even in space exploration, there has to be some sort of just eyeball contact? To me, and I think to most of the general population, there's a difference between a robot seeing something on Mars and a fellow human being seeing something on Mars.
Well, that's kind of human inquisitiveness.
Yeah.
But again, the issue, I think the fundamental issue here is cost effectiveness.
Well, yeah.
What it costs you to do that. I mean, we talk now about Mars missions, and we don't do a lot of things that are overtly suicidal. Mm-hmm. And so when you start talking about deep space exploration, many of them are obviously one-way trips.
Exactly.
And you got individuals who are saying, send me.
Not me.
Willing to do that just for the excitement of it. But hard issues, and again, I think you really get back to just the cost effectiveness. A lot cheaper to send out robotic probes than to send manned flight.
And I'm not I'm not signing up for Buzz Aldrin's.
But
send me to Mars.
This gets to the other issue that one of the things we talked about, and I heard you mention, and that says, maybe we don't need to send widgets out there when you have a consciousness application.
Absolutely. I would agree 100% with that. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences at the Skinwalker, Bigelow, Sherman Ranch?
Well, my experiences would be pretty boring. I don't know if you saw the program with Jesse Ventura when he
yes
trapped me on that, just pure nonsense. But, and he asked, could he go up there? I said, well, you can, but you'd be really bored. There were a number of very, very unusual incidents that happened. But when you amortize this over about 6 years that the observations went on, it turns out they're really quite rare. And some of them seem to be centered around one individual who seems to be kind of more sensitive. I don't think there's any doubt that very, very strange things happen there.
In the whole Unit Basin, I guess.
Myself, I frankly didn't see anything and spent hours and hours looking. Others at other times did. Some of the stuff we had the ranch instrumented, and they were doing, in some case, time-lapse photography at 24/7, and had some unusual things happen on camera, and some things that should have been on camera that never showed up. And this is what led to the place in the book where I talk about precognitive sentient phenomena. And this is sort of like the trickster. Mm-hmm. It seemed like there was a superior consciousness that was involved, that was creating the incidents. When I say it's precognitive, it seemed to know how we would respond to a set of circumstances before it was even presented. And then it kept morphing. The actions or whatever happened, you did not generally get the same experience twice. So you would set up to try and study an incident that happened, and then either it'd be off camera or you get something totally different. But that they occurred absolutely happened.
Wow.
If anybody's interested, I'd recommend the book by George Knapp and
Colm Kelleher.
Yeah.
Colm. Colm was the deputy administrator and probably spent more time up there than anybody else. But they outline. I put a few of them in the UFO book, but their whole book is devoted to that.
Yes.
And pretty accurate to the best of my knowledge.
Yes.
If that was accurate, that is one scary place.
Well, all those wolves that were larger than normal and were sort of metamorphosized out of
and that thing that came out
black mist and so
the
forth.
Dog and all.
The grease spots.
But remember,
that were dogs.
when you spread them out over years, not that scary.
Well, if it happened once at my house, I'd be selling.
Nervous a lot more, and people have said maybe I just not wired right because I tend not to be. I tend to be the guy who says, "Let me go look at that."
Yeah. Well, not any place I'm going bed and breakfasting anytime soon. Yeah. But the other thing that you might find interesting when you would talk about this is that they recently came out. They were studying how life had evolved in any way, and then they were talking about RNA world, and then they discovered that perhaps tRNA could have evolved given proteins and substrates and blah, 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 and all this stuff. But the one researcher made an interesting comment. He said that, it seems to me the only way to create RNA would be human involvement. In other words, he felt that obviously in a lab they can create RNA at this point. But I thought, wow, wouldn't that be interesting? As if the whole point of evolution was to go back in time and then, time being the illusion, create tRNA, and then everything else would come from that, so that life would be, as a lot of these people say, just a circular path. And I just thought that was so fascinating that a guy studying, just molecular physics, in a sense, would come out and feel that human involvement, or perhaps not human involvement, but
teleological issues can be an interesting mind trap.
Definitely. But I thought it was an interesting.
It's certainly worth Gedanken.
Yeah,
experimentation.
Coming from that man, I thought it was interesting. But anyway, I was just that passing thought.
And we really, I guess we're getting a little bit short on time now, but we didn't really get into much about your experiences with the non-lethal weapons, which I have to go back and ask this question from my daughter, because she and I were captivated by the feminizing spray, which we thought was the answer to all the world's problems some time ago when we first read about it. So whatever happened to that?
I don't even know how to address that or fund it.
Well, I'll tell you a line from an old joke. It's
being used continuously. I'm not sure. What's the question?
I'm sorry. Had you developed a non-lethal weapon such as a feminizing spray that was used on opposing armies? No? No. I mean, I think it's...
And technically that would be illegal.
Oh, okay. Well,
because you're into chemical kinds of issues.
Oh, chemical weapons. Okay.
And this is an issue that we grappled with a long time. I think we got the wrong laws. Mm-hmm. Even Don Rumsfeld, of all people, complained about the inability to use riot control agents. And now we're literally forced to shoot people.
Yeah.
Because you can't use some of the alternatives. But we had questions early on. What's chemical warfare? Can I use dye, for instance? If I've got rioters out there, rather than dealing on the time, I'll just spray them with persistent dye and then be able to pick people up later. Is that chemical warfare? It's quite an interesting trap. There are many, many systems, and as we say, they range from the personal systems you know about, from pepper spray and tasers and things of that nature, all the way up to, let's say, strategic incapacitation, where you can take down the infrastructure of a country. Pulse power, and you're seeing one of the arguments early on was whether or not information warfare, which is now called cyber war, would be a piece of it. But that's taken on a life of its own.
Indeed. It's very interesting to me, the idea of non-lethal weapons, because it seems to me that so many agencies, and I'm not talking about U.S. government agencies, I'm just talking about, I guess, nation states would be the best way to put it, would prefer to invade the nation state next to them and render it peopleless so that they could go in and use it for themselves. So the idea of not being lethal, as opposed to, wasn't there something one time, something like a neutron bomb, which was supposed to just kill all living things?
The neutron bomb is actually the antithesis of non-lethal.
Exactly.
And that is what you were describing, where you eliminate the people and keep the resources.
Right.
Ours is the opposite, and it came out from, of course, I had lots of thinking in the military and that evolved in conflicts, but also looking at, say, Panama, Grenada, and Haiti potentially. I've written books, by the way, I haven't mentioned those, but I've written a couple of books in the field, many, many articles. But the point is, if you looked at, let's take Panama, for instance, our argument was with Noriega and a number of his henchmen, not with the Panamanian people. You were going to invade, and we've had a historic, favorable relationship with Panama for,
right. Yeah.
Many decades. And so the outcome you wanted was Noriega goes away and we return the country to the Panamanians and have friendly relationships. Killing them is not advantageous
not
in
productive.
the long term.
Right,
So
not productive.
the idea was having alternatives that allow you to apply force without necessarily killing folks.
Well, that's preferable, certainly preferable. But it would seem that a lot of nation states might have other plans, I would say.
Well, I also argue in other publications that the nation state is a failing concept.
Yes.
That that now the macro social agglomeration is based on belief system. I've written some articles recently about ISIS and how to take care of that problem that are published in the Huffington Post. But the focus is on, that they can now get together and cause things to happen because of information technology that not only allows them to recruit, but as we've seen recently, actually cause people to go out and do things, even though they have no physical contact with them.
It's amazing. Would you like to mention some of your other books that we did not mention?
Well, of course, The Warrior's Edge was the first one, which is based on the intelligence community. If you can find it, that's really out of print and costs far too much. But there I did talk about the metal bending and remote viewing and NLP research and that. Future War was the first one on non-lethal weapons, and I did Winning the War, which was a sequel to that. And again, it was on the advances that had taken place in non-lethal weaponry. I went from non-lethal to hyper-lethal systems.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm sure that, some of our listeners who, military UFO type people who have been on the show and may be listening would definitely be interested in reading those, as I would. And in terms of ISIL or Daesh, where are they getting the money? I think if you follow the money, that might be part of the answer. It's just a layman's point of view. I'm not you, I'm not an expert on it, but it seems to me they're selling that oil somewhere and getting the money from that.
Well, it is, but they have also developed means, literally taking over banks. Much of the arms have been just captured. A lot of stuff that we had delivered to the Iraqi army has been captured and used by them. They are involved in arms trade. Human trafficking is a major source of resource for them, taking over oil fields. I think they're eminently beatable. I wrote to this early, in February. But I don't think it's our fight. I don't think it's something that we can do. And as long as the U.S. is seen as either integrally involved or certainly leading it, ISIS then has an infinite supply of recruits.
Right.
And their stated objective is to draw us into the fight. And they also know that it's the best recruiting instrument that they have.
Right. Well, I was... Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was good. So your idea at this point would be not to so much ignore them, but just not to get involved with them. Interesting.
Unfortunately, I think this is a fight that they have got to have, and it's going to be very, very messy. Since 13th century, it's been ongoing with between the Sunni and Shia. But I think this brand is so extreme that eventually it'd be extinguished. And one of my early articles pointed out that there's adequate force available to do this without the U.S. For instance, Turkey, who's been sitting on the sideline, has 43 armored battalions. They have chosen to do nothing. Of course, we've just seen huge government change there over the past weekend.
Yes, indeed.
But if you look at the forces that are combined, and you might have some uncomfortable allies, i.e., what do we do with Iran? Unfortunately, we have chosen to demonize Iran, which I think is the wrong strategic move to make. They have adequate armed forces, and they don't have to wait to train the Iraqi army, which we've spent billions, hundreds of billions on already, and it has proven to be totally ineffective. And I don't think doing more of the same is going to work.
Well, I guess I would have to agree with you, and unfortunately, our time has run out here. I do want to ask you one final question, which is, do you see the human race lasting to the end of the century?
Oh, I think something will certainly last. Exactly what we look like may change, but remember, we're at 7-8 billion and counting, expanding too rapidly. But I think there will be fairly dramatic changes. Unfortunately, you get into sociological, economic issues of the split between haves and have-nots. I think is going to be the major dividing force for the future. And you have the elitists will certainly move out in some direction, whether they can survive or the have-nots get rise up and do something. Remains to be seen.
Well, I guess it's always the case. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But Dr. Alexander, this has...
I thought it was the rich get rich and the poor get babies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's that too.
Okay, that's... I cannot thank you enough for taking the time. You are a man of incredible accomplishments. Thank you so much for taking this time to spend with us.
Yes, thank you. It's been a wonderful experience speaking with you, and we hope to have you back again if you're willing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, goodbye from Kate and Fahrusha here. Please like us on iTunes.
And honestly, it's so difficult to interview a man like Dr. Alexander. It's like, how do you interview an encyclopedia?
Well, he's an incredible resource. He knows so many people, and he's done so many things. We didn't even really get into the shamanism very much. Would have loved to hear more about the shamans up in Siberia that he visited, and Nepal, and all the places he's been. I mean, I'm an inveterate traveler, and I can't even scratch what he's done.
Yeah, a very fortunate man. And again, all through his book, though, he always refers to destiny and being pushed along that path, and I think he has been. Well,
he's obviously an extraordinary fellow.
But next week, we have another extraordinary fellow.
Yes, we do. Actually, in 2 weeks from today, we have the absolutely phenomenally interesting Alex Karras, who has his own podcast called Skeptico. And he is a big promoter of consciousness as opposed to the mechanistic, materialistic view of the universe. And the people who are way on the other side of that, the kind of religious zealots on the far right, and the materialists. And I'm not talking about politics here, but just on one side of the divide, we have fundamental religious crazies, and on the other side are the people who think we're just meat puppets. And he stands firmly in between for consciousness. So we are looking forward to speaking with Alex Karras. And thanks for tuning in. Please like us on Facebook, like us on iTunes, like us everywhere you can. Thank you.